Hello, welcome to the USAID Asia Counter-Trafficking Person Summit from Evidence to Action, hosted by Winrock International. My name is Hermes, and I'm joined here by my colleague Abigail.
আপনাদেরকে স্বাগতম।
Thai. Okay.
Okay. You are at the session titled Barriers to Evidence Uptake, Civil Society Organization Perspectives. We will begin in just a moment here, but before we get started, we just want to let you know a few of the features available to you today here in Zoom meetings. Your participation via chat is highly encouraged, and our team will work to acknowledge and address as many comments and questions as we can throughout today's session. This meeting will be recorded, and please keep your camera off unless you are invited to speak in order to help everyone have a smooth connection today. Continue the conversation in the conference community on MS Teams and spark further conversations on social media using the hashtags WinrockE2A and Evidence to Action. Once again, you are at the session titled Barriers to Evidence Uptake, Civil Society Organization Perspectives. We are now ready to get started. Thank you for your patience today and helping to make this an inclusive event with all the different languages. I will now hand the floor to Sarah Piazzano, Chief of Party of the USAID Asia Counter-Trafficking Persons Project at Winrock International. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. So this is going to be, I'm very excited about this session. We have representatives from civil society organizations from
हामी अहिले विभिन्न नागरिक समाजका प्रतिनिधित्व गर्ने व्यक्तिहरू समावेश हुनुहुन्छ आजको छलफलमा। हामी विभिन्न सङ्घ संस्थाहरूसँग छौँ, विभिन्न देशका सहभागीहरूसँग आजको यो छलफल गर्दैछौँ। यो शोधको लागि चाहिँ अगाडि बढाउन के बाधा व्यवधानहरू छ त्यसको बारेमा चाहिँ आज छलफल गरिरहेका छौँ। तपाईहरुलाई आजको छलफलमा चाहिँ केही प्रश्नहरू आएको छ भने चाहिँ तपाईहरुले निर्धारकसँग आफ्नो प्रश्नहरू राख्न सक्नुहुन्छ। तपाईहरुले आफ्नो अनुभवहरू चाहिँ कृपया साट्नु होला। तपाईहरुको विभिन्न उसबाट आउनु भएको होला, विभिन्न ब्याकग्राउन्डबाट। त्यो भएको कारणले गर्दाखेरि पनि यसलाई सकेसम्म समावेशी तरिकाले चाहिँ अगाडि बढाउन सकिन्छ।
From this research, but not always those recommendations translate into implementation. So we are trying to understand why, what prevents NGOs to adopt those recommendations. And maybe also to look at some good examples. In some cases, we see that those recommendations are implemented and they bring it to the interesting changes in the way we work. Of course, it is a waste for all if we cannot use the research findings. It's a waste of money, time, and also it's a waste of opportunity of having more evidence-based work. But I don't want to speak more. I want to let our guests to share their experience and also to report from their group discussion. So I wanted to start from Thailand. So Maya, you work from Urban Light in Thailand, and you also had a group discussion with other NGOs from Thailand. Can you share with us some of the main points that were highlighted in your group discussion?
Yeah, sure, I can. So we had a discussion today, and I also had the chance to speak to a couple of other NGOs yesterday and today. And there were a few themes that emerged in what we were looking at in terms of research needs. We're looking at gaps in research that focuses on the long-term impact of CTIP initiatives, but also on the impact of several NGOs rather than just one, or looking at how like rather than focusing on just on one NGO, we might focus on the work holistically of like 500 NGOs, or whether instead of looking at just advocacy or just prevention or just protection, we could look at how all different sectors have come together and over time what's worked and what hasn't worked. That was one suggestion that came up.
Do you think there is also a problem of understanding each other? Yesterday I was having a discussion with people from a research field and they were highlighting this problem of mutual understanding, mutual trust, respect, lack of collaboration. Do you find also that happening in Thailand?
Between NGOs or with researchers and NGOs?
With researchers, between researchers and NGOs.
Yeah, the feedback that we got was that oftentimes researchers may come from an academic background or from another country where they maybe are not so familiar with the local context. And so they may have the skills and the analytical skills, the academic background to conduct a piece of research, but then translating that over into the local context is not as efficient as, and doesn't gather as good information as it could do if we were to better coordinate with people who are working on the ground. And that includes involving local staff, but also importantly, like potential recipients or beneficiaries of this research we hope will ultimately be impacted in a positive way in the future, for them to be involved in the design of the research, even from the process of designing the call for proposals. So not only in designing the research itself, but looking at the limitations within that call from the bias or, you know, the perspective of the donor that's saying, okay, we want to have some research on this topic, you know, in these areas, starting from a more bottom-up perspective of, you know, feeling out via people who are living on the ground, who live with the experience and who access information that in ways that perhaps you and I can't, for them to really be steering the direction of the research from the very beginning.
Thank you. No, I think that's a very important point of this involvement, starting, as you said, from designing the research and yes, involvement not only who is working on the ground, but also the people that will be involved in the research. Sometimes I also not involved in the design, and I would add also that they should be involved in the sharing of the findings. Sometimes we conduct researches are conducted, but the people that were interviewed, they will never know what the results are. Sokchar from Cambodia, so you are from Legal Support for Women and Children, and you have long experience in Cambodia. We also work together there. So can you, is it something similar in Cambodia? Do you have anything more to add about the barriers to implement the recommendations, what the problems are?
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Sokchar. I'm from Legal Support for Children and Women. I think the problem is not different from what Maria just highlighted about the barrier to implement the recommendation. But I want to highlight some example. You know, last few years ago, maybe last 5 or 10 years ago, when the Human Rights Watch they conduct the research on the situation of the domestic worker from Cambodia to Malaysia. You know, and then they present the finding to the government. And then the government said that your finding is not correct. The way you collect the data is not correct. You see? So this is some of the challenges we found in Cambodia. I think first, maybe like what Maria said, we need to thinking more about the coordination among the NGO, the research agency in Cambodia. This is really important that we really need to discuss. And it should be start from the design process until the implementation process. This is really important. This is one I really agree with Maria from the Thai side. Second thing is also about the researcher team or the research institution. I think this is also very important. If we work on the issue of the human trafficking, we work on the issue of the city. We need people, we need the researcher, we need the institution who have a knowledge on the issue, the knowledge on the trafficking. I think in some cases, the researcher conduct the research on the trafficking, but they do not have knowledge on trafficking. They have knowledge on the research methodology. They have a knowledge on the data collection. But when we come into the point of data analysis and the recommendation, that is a problem. And some recommendation for why it's not really applicable. We really need the action recommendation, not really a high recommendation, then cannot implementation. And I think this is the gap in the research, especially in the recommendation. And frankly speaking, I think most of the research that we found in Cambodia, the recommendation just from the point of view of the researcher in some cases, not from the consultation process. Because when you recommend something to the government, to the other key stakeholder, it should be properly discussed, it properly consulted, then those recommendations can be implemented. If you just recommend by your own way, and how can the recommendation will be implemented? This is what we learn.
Yeah.
And I think really important that we need to discuss more and to find a way to how we can coordinate and collaborate together when we conduct this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I think that's of course very important in designing the recommendations that should come through a consultative process, so that recommendations are also feasible. But you said sometimes these researchers, they are very technical, they have great knowledge on research methodologies, but maybe they don't have that great knowledge on trafficking and the knowledge of the context. But don't you think that in this case, that could be our role? Our role could be, if we have a good attitudes, a good attitude from both sides, our role could be to explain and to help them, to guide them. So I think in that case, maybe it can be also our commitment to work more closely with the researchers.
Right, I agree with you in that point, right? But I think some of the researchers, right, they come to us, talk to us like the interviewee, and then they go away. That's the problem. That's why I really support the idea of Mary mentioned earlier, like you mentioned earlier. We need a starting point to discuss, to come up together during the research design. It means to sensitive on the issue, to sensitive on the context for the researcher. I think this is our role, and I agree with you that is our role to play.
Okay, thank you. And please also all participants, all people in the audience, continue to use the chat box. So you can continue to write down your inputs and your questions there. And also our speakers are looking at those, and you can you can talk to them. So we said we need to go, we need to work together from the designing to the recommendations. Anything else that came from your group, April, from the Philippines? You were a big group. So anything else that you found about barriers, but also maybe some ideas on how we can bridge the gap? What can we do from our side to help research to be more useful to us and to have recommendations that can really help us?
Yes, well, I agree with what already Maya and Sakhar had mentioned regarding the different barriers with regard to collaboration with different NGOs. And maybe one of the solutions we can also do with regard to making our research more in context on the local level is to also engage more engagement with the academia with regard to developing research that are really local based other than working with international NGOs, because sometimes internal NGOs may not be able to capture what the local context or what the local needs are. But if we engage with local academies or universities who are situated in the same area, they may be able to assist us. And as you mentioned, as researchers, it is your role to provide the technical aspect of the research, and the academe can help us with that. And as NGOs, we will be providing what the quality of the context and of all the information that are needed in the research. And also with working with academe, we can develop researches that are the results are easily accessible as it is localized already, and we can also get the results much immediately other than those other researches that are developed somewhere else. So that is one of the things that could work in our barriers in erasing some of the barriers that we are experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have maybe some example of cases where you had problems or cases where it worked well?
Yes. Well, with what we've done here in our consortium in the Philippines, specifically in Cebu, one of our organizations was able to work with the university in developing a research that how to maximize or strengthen engagement with private sectors with regard to how do we get more engagement with them. And one of the things that came up with that research is other than capacitating private sectors in adapting the advocacies and child protection, we were able to find out that we can also, there's willingness of the private sector to also help the NGOs in providing economic inclusion and economic services to our victim survivors or children and families that we are working with. So that was a quick research, and it has the qualitative and the quantitative data that we needed, and that helped us in developing our programs and services with working with private sectors.
Thank you. So what do you think in that case? Did it work well because the research was very specific, because you designed it together?
Yes, that's definitely it. It started with what the organization needed at the moment, and the academe and the research was able to capture the need and translate it into that type of research.
Thank you. That was very interesting. So we were talking about barriers, and you mentioned also about the access. That's for sure one reason why it can be difficult to implement the recommendations. And it's not just a problem sometimes of a language, but also because the language used is too technical. Our recommendations are not very specific or practical, or research are too long. We don't have time to search. Maybe they need to tell us in a clear, simple, understandable way. So Mary, from Central Asia, you had many NGOs from different countries in your group. Did you find something similar? Can you add something more that was not mentioned already on the barriers, or if you want to share some good examples and why it worked?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I would love to also thank our NGOs that could find time and discuss and could bring and highlight the barriers to address the recommendations. And one of them was the lack of capacity, lack of capacity of NGOs to follow the new approaches, because as it was mentioned, we in the recommendations, the researchers would love the NGOs to address and to implement new approaches during the implementation of their projects and development of their projects. But the barriers that were highlighted during our discussions, as I mentioned, it was a lack of capacity. For instance, the the NGOs, they need to train and to have more experience and maybe more staff to apply new approaches. And of course, the other reason was also mentioned, the lack of funding to implement activities under the recommendations. And as well as for the Central Asian region, the political situation, the political willingness, and the mentality and the religious aspects are also the barriers to address the recommendations under the research and surveys. And also, it was highlighted, for example, the recommendation to involve survivors in informing, for instance, to speak about their story, to raise awareness level of the general population is not always applicable in Central Asia countries because of the country aspect and context, and especially in case of if the survivor is the survivor of sexual exploitation. So as it was mentioned, there are a lot of barriers that the NGOs face during implementation of their activities and recommendations. And also, as it was also mentioned, to overcome these barriers, it was mentioned that NGOs should be involved at all stages. And of course, the researchers should conduct an analysis of the current situation, and of course, taking into account the recommendations from the NGOs before conducting research. And they should simplify the language of research and reporting, as well as it was mentioned before, to have and highlight the specific recommendations, taking into account the context of the country and region, not generalized recommendations.
Thank you. Excellent points. You were saying, that sometimes the barriers to implement this recommendation, it's a lack of capacities, lack of funding, or also political willingness, or cultural barriers to implement those recommendations. But don't you think that maybe it should be the other way around, that when researchers develop their recommendations, they should consider all that? I mean, they should consider the capacities and funding available, who can implement those recommendations. Yesterday I heard Sona, she worked as a researcher in Central Asia. She said, I conducted research there. I gave recommendations. After 10 years, I went back. It was exactly the same. Nothing has happened. Maybe there are reasons why nothing has happened. Maybe she didn't. I feel sometimes that researchers, they come out with recommendations, but with not an idea who is going to implement those recommendations. Is it feasible?
Yeah, I totally agree with your point. And that's why it was mentioned that NGOs, they should be involved at all stages, from the beginning to the end, when the researchers develop their report and recommendations. And as it was mentioned, the recommendations should be very specific, and they should address and identify who should be implementing these recommendations. And when we have these specific recommendations with the people and the organizations who should be doing this, then I think we can move forward.
Thank you, and please, I invite all the speakers, if you have other points on these issues, please use the chat. Please write your messages there. Unfortunately, we don't have time to give the floor to everyone to answer each question, but please, if you can answer in the chat. And of course, all participants continue to use the chat. So you talk about sometimes political willingness, and we need also to consider the country where we are working in when we look at the feasibility of implementing the recommendations. So I wanted to move to Laos. Sukyata, are you there? I cannot see your video.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello. How are you?
Hi.
So Kiet, you also had a big discussion with other stakeholders in Laos. So I wanted to ask you more about the barriers, also considering, you know, the NGOs, they have to work with an MOU with the government. So how can be the barriers there to implement the recommendations from research specific to Laos?
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I would like to also thank you for our partner who came the other day to join discussions about the research barrier. So our group also, we have recommendations of the barrier for the recommendation implementations of the research in Laos. Then we have few points here. For example, the recommendations are not practical and not priority for the government or project. And the recommendation is not necessarily able to put into the actions, and the evidence are not reliable. And also in Laos here, we also discussed that we lack of the secondary data or secondary research that we have, excuse me, we have lack of the limitation of the research, let's put in this way. And also due to the limitations of the timing, so then we run out of time to implement all the recommendations. And another one is also then the quality of the report is sometimes is not necessarily up to the standard. And then also that we also discuss we often missing the information from the destination countries, or another that put also in another hand that when they at the regional researchers conduct any research, so the Laos is left out. Is maybe because of it is quite take a long time to conduct research here in Laos. Or that is another to take a long time in preparing a thing like that. And another one is to get approval from the government. That is also take long time, and the government protocol. So that's why often that the informations at the regional level that Laos left out. When we talking about this, recommendations are not necessarily practical. Sometimes that the report is often recommend to let's say to change the policy, for example, no, and that is quite challenging to change the policy. For example, to amendment of the tip law or something like that. So our team also then recommend that why don't we do is more practical as the community-based recommendations, that we can work directly with the local authority. Then we can do a bottom-up rather than top-up approach. So that is we also discuss in among our group of the recommendations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Now that's really interesting about how we should also consider consider more the context and maybe also involve more the governments in designing the research to be sure that then we can implement those recommendations. And also your point on the regional research, that's important, involving all the countries and maybe having some recommendations at regional level and more specific at the country level. But now let me move to South Asia. So now we have been moving from Southeast Asia, Central Asia. Now we are in South Asia. We have here Zinat from Bangladesh and Balma from Nepal. So I would like to start from Bangladesh, and I wanted to raise one more point. Yesterday, when I was thinking about the barriers and the difficulty to implement recommendations, I was thinking also as an NGO worker about the risk that we are taking. Whenever you make a change in your project, you're taking a risk. You're dealing with lives of people. and it's a big responsibility. For example, we are hearing from research we should move from shelter support to community-based support. Okay, we can do that, but what if then there are higher risk for people in communities and maybe we don't have enough resources to do it well, and we do it and then things go wrong. You know, if you have been working in the same way for many years, you know that even if it's not perfect, it's fine. But when you make the change, it's a big risk, and it's the NGO that is taking this risk. So I wanted to hear from Zinat. What do you find in Bangladesh? Can you share with us something from your group discussion? Sorry, I think.
Thank you, Sarah, for asking the question. And we have discussed it in our NGO group, in the discussion room, and also we have large discussion with our other NGOs and also our colleagues. That one thing is that research findings, you can we have very good examples of research finding implementing in our projects, and we that one thing is that we try to actually the point here is that whether it is bringing any risk there. So what we tried to do as our project, we can say our project was very well designed, but it also needs some research. After implementation, the program, we need some researches. And our research, one research we conducted, it is very scientific research, and another was methodological research, and others we conducted as per our need. So we found that the research findings were some of the research findings are very positive research findings. For example, if I say that we have conducted one research on male survivor need assessment. In that male survivor need assessment, in Bangladesh or in this region, there is one taboo: is that male are very strong. They don't need any counseling. They are very strong. They can bear any kind of trauma situation, something like this. But in our research, it came out that in the in-depth interview, they were not very open in the focus group. But when we have conducted in-depth interview, we found that they do mention that they do need counseling. They are not open coming to the counseling center because they feel ashamed. That's why they don't want to come sometimes. But they do need counseling. They need someone who will put his hand to his shoulder, or they need hugging to overcome the trauma situation. So these research findings actually help us a lot to taking in our to implementing our program, and we found very good positive feedback, positive results on it. We have another research we did that is the Counter-Trafficking Committee. That Counter-Trafficking, one of our indicator is to functional as Counter-Trafficking Committee. So after implementing program for 1 or 2 hours, we try to see what is happening in the field. Are they really functional? What efforts so far we made, after 2 years, whether it was functional. Then we found, no, it's really the outcome of the research was very frustrating. Then we very closely work with them. And also we review other government procedures. For example, we have a regular meeting in the ministry, and in the ministry it said that work together with Counter-Trafficking Committee to make functional. So when we take this document to the Counter-Trafficking Committee, then they realize that it is not only NGO's agenda, it is the government agenda. So in the NGOs, they are helping us to make us functional. Then we found that, okay, it was working together. They were become very active in doing supporting the survivors. Apart from this, what we did, we engaged them in our all events very actively. For example, when we have any meeting in the community, any event in the community, or any session, any training, anything we conducted, we bring the Counter-Trafficking members in our session. They give a short message, and sometimes they stay there. So this is how we educate. We try to make them understanding the trafficking context and what is the need for trafficking. And also in our different meetings, there are trafficking survivors or victims. They delivered some speech from their experience. So hearing all this, we made them sensitized, and they are now wherever we are working, most of our trafficking committee members are very active and very proactive. They proactively call us that if they have any training session, they proactively call back us that, do we have any survivors to participate in this training? We are having this call. So this type of this research actually, operational research actually help us very much to scale up our program. That's why what was our other discussion, we're discussing that in most cases that the researcher, they are not very subject oriented. That's why they are research is not only interviewing some things. You have to understand the whole context. What is government saying? What is international? What is the international mandate? What is the community expectation? What is the trafficking victim sector? You have to understand all the context. Once you understand all the context, then you can come up with very strong recommendations to implement, and those are very helpful to to achieve the project goal and objectives.
Thank you. All very important points. I think it's very important what you just said about understanding all the context. And I think again that this can be also our commitment. On research, it doesn't have to have all the experience, knowledge that we have working in the field, but it's our commitment also to help them, to guide them, and but also to understand their own expertise and to respect that. And I think it's also there should be openness from both sides to have this good, respectful communication and supporting each other, understanding that it's helping each other to work together. And also what you said about involving all different stakeholders, I mean, in order to implement, to translate the recommendations into implementation, we need, of course, all stakeholders committed to do that. So unless we involve them since the beginning, and that means government, local government, survivors, and anyone else that we need to involve for implementing the recommendations, they should be involved since the beginning.
Exactly. I mean, if you can do this type of research at the very beginning of the project, after implementing 1 or 2 years, then you can come up with the findings. Where is the loopholes and what more proactiveness you need? For example, we have a national plan of action. In the national plan of action, all the stakeholders' roles and responsibilities are laid out. So where we found difficulties, I mean, the counter-trafficking committee members were not giving us access. They said, no, it is NGO's work, you do your work, or don't come here. This type of challenges we have faced. Then what we did, we took the national plan of action with us and we gave them, we submitted them and we showed them that, look, it is not only the NGO's work, it is also your work. And then we get very good results, very positive results, that then they become okay again. And we have this is how we want to point out one thing, that referral mechanism. This is how we could activate the other actors. If many other NGOs, local level NGOs, they also followed our mechanism, that how to work together, how to bring people, all stakeholders together, and to involve everyone in the process.
Yeah, thank you. And I think also it's also important we have sometimes governments they look at some pieces of research as a way to to identify problems, gaps, and they're worried about it. They are skeptical about working together. And it's important to highlight the benefits of having data and working together. So to understand together how the research can be important and useful to the different stakeholders. And also you share much experience. There is of course much experience in the field, and you know, we should be able to include in the data, in the evidence, all the experience that we have. So I think this is something that I would ask research to help us to translate all our experience into some evidence that can be used to guide the future implementation. And now, sorry, we really have limited time, and sorry, Balm, I kept you in the end. And thank you for joining us from Nepal. Thanks a lot. I know we touched already many points. If you have something different on the barriers, or if you would like to share us something more about which data we still need, which is the data that would be most needed for our work, or some other barriers to implement research findings.
Thanks, Sarah. In the recommendation part, I don't have any such very different recommendation or different things from the Nepalese perspective. So what I would like to add on that part is, like, we don't have a robust uptake strategy. Like many organizations, they carry out research works, but we don't reach to a larger mass while we disseminate our findings. So that is one of the barriers. We have different strong recommendations, but we fail to translate that into action. It's because, like already mentioned, there is also interest of donor agency or funding agency. So that is one of the things. And the other thing is, like the small organizations, they are reluctant to try the new approaches because of different resources constraint. And also the support from government, local government, or the funding agencies. So that has also failed to translate the recommendations into action. And the other thing is, like there is a less collaborative approach among the local CSOs, especially in terms of using data and using all the evidences and recommendations. So they carry out strong works in the communities, but there has not been adequate collaboration in translating all those recommendations and making the deep efforts more robust. So that is the thing. And in terms of data, there is not an integrated online database and online evidence gathering space or platform. So that has really made all the data is scattered, so that the organizations, they are not able to find or gather data and use that into their works. So yeah, that's it on the part of data, and I don't have much to add on the recommendations and that part.
Thank you so much. It was, I think, very important point that was not raised about this collaborative approach. I would say from both sides, from research and NGOs, because of course, if we keep getting reports telling us different things, NGOs doing different things, then it's difficult to have a real impact in our work. So I think that was another very good point. And I'm really sorry, but we reached 3 o'clock. I have to say it was great to have you here. I learned a lot, and I know you have many other points. I will put everything together. So please send me all your notes. I will prepare a document to share with the participants, with all recommendations coming from NGO side. And also, I know there were excellent comments in the chat. Don't worry, we are keeping the chat. We will continue also the conversations in Microsoft Teams. And yes, it's very interesting comments there too. We will integrate everything there. And thank you so much. And please also remember that in this summit, we have a grant challenge. We are going to award 3 small grants. You can partner with other organizations. The idea is to have a team of at least people belonging to 2 different groups, like NGOs, research, or private sector, and you can compete. Please do. The deadline is November 30. Okay, so that's all from my side. Thank you. And if you have any last word, we have 1 minute. Okay, I think that's fine. So thank you, Maya from the Philippines. Sorry, Maya from Thailand. April from
Thank you for the
Zina
opportunity.
from Bangladesh, Balma from Nepal, Sukia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sokshar from Cambodia, and Mary from which country? Sorry. Uzbekistan.
From Kyrgyzstan. From Kyrgyzstan, but working for Central Asia. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, thank you to all of you, and thank you for the participants. And now you can also jump to the next section that is on victim identification.
Thank you for attending the Evidence to Action Summit and today's session. We have an ongoing session for another 30 minutes on social behavior change communications. We have sent the link for that seminar in the chat. Our first afternoon session will be referral mechanism and victim identification, overcoming barriers, taking place right now. That session is beginning now. Remember that there is a $50,000 US pitch competition being offered to registrants of this summit. Find out the information on the website or on the conference community on MS Teams. Proposals featuring new partnerships formed at this summit will be prioritized, and applications are due at the end of the month. Connect with potential collaborators on the conference community. Thank you for your participation and have a great day. Again, we will be closing this room. You can head to the last 30 minutes of social behavior change and communication, and the next session will be referral mechanism and victim identification, overcoming barriers, taking place right now. The links for this should be in your guide. Remember that there is a $50,000 US pitch competition being offered to registrants of this summit. Find out more information on the website or on the conference community on MS Teams. Proposals featuring new partnerships formed at this summit are prioritized, and applications are due at the end of the month. Connect with potential collaborators on the conference community. Thank you again for your participation, and please head to one of the other rooms now. We have an ongoing session for another 30 minutes on social behavior change communication. You can find that link in the chat. Our next afternoon session will be referral mechanism and victim identification, overcoming barriers, taking place right now. Please find the links for all of these sessions in your participants guide. We have an ongoing session for another 30 minutes on social behavior change communication. You can find the link in the chat. Our first afternoon session is referral mechanisms and victim identification, overcoming barriers, taking place right now. These links are all available in your participants guide. Thank you again for your participation and have a great day.